and I'm a senior studying political science and global studies, and I want to thank all of you for coming today. Throughout the semester, I've been researching the effects of democratic erosion in Latin America, and today I'll be focusing on how populist leaders in Brazil and Venezuela have contributed to democratic erosion in their countries. The research question for my thesis is why were the effects of democratic erosion more prominent under populist leader Hugo Chavez in Venezuela than under populist leader Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil? To make this comparison, I will be looking at political, economic, and social similarities and differences between the two leaders. To begin, I would like to start with background on democratic erosion and populism as a foundation for my research. Democratic erosion is the name given to explain the phenomenon under which countries become less democratic over time. Since the principle of healthy democracy is free and fair elections, the main way that democratic erosion can occur is through limiting the contestation of opposition political parties and limiting political participation in elections, organizing through protest, or by limiting civil liberties. By removing these methods of vertical accountability in a system, political leaders can change the structure of democracy. The other way that erosion occurs is through methods of dissolving horizontal accountability or accountability within a government by expanding the power of the executive branch and removing or altering the power of the other branches. Populism, while this type of erosion can occur under any political leader, my research is focused specifically on the effects of populist leaders on democracy. Populism is a political ideology rooted in stopping corruption, limiting the power of elites, and ending the ineffectiveness of mainstream political parties. Their rhetoric is centered around uplifting the ordinary people of a country who have been left behind by the inner workings of the political system. While the ideas of populists seem, in theory, to be necessary to improve the shortcomings of democracy, populism actually has a negative effect on political systems and leads to a significant risk of democratic erosion. So why is populism actually bad for democracy? Populism can affect the overall quality of a democracy by dissolving checks and balances and limiting political participation. Populists capitalize on existing divisions within a society by encouraging a zero-sum mentality. Populist leaders use their for-the-people rhetoric to garner support over removing essential democratic institutions in the name of fixing corruption and ineffectiveness, when in reality, they are able to expand their control over central government and erode democracy. Populist leaders, on average, last twice as long in office as non-populists, meaning that they have more time to carry out their methods of erosion. Additionally, only 34% of populists leave their position under a free or fair election, meaning that it takes more drastic measures, such as a coup, to remove a populist leader from power. Populist leaders are 4 times more likely to harm democratic institutions while in power, and a shocking 50% of populists rewrite the Constitution or extend their term limits to remain in power. Finally, even though most populists gain support for running on an anti-corruption platform, 40% of populist leaders are indicted on corruption charges. Populism is becoming more of a common phenomenon in the 21st century, and for my research, I'm focusing on 2 cases in South America that have had a populist leader in power to compare the successes of each leader on eroding democracy in their country. To explain why these 2 cases were picked, this graph here depicts the strength of local democracy in the 21st century in both Brazil and Venezuela. Venezuela is our first case, and we'll be looking at populist leader Hugo Chavez, who was elected in 1999 and was president until his death in 2012. As we can see in this graph, his election in the year that followed turned the country from a strong democracy into a full authoritarian regime that remains today. With Brazil, we're looking at populist leader Jair Bolsonaro, who was elected in 2018 and remained in office until 2022 when he lost his re-election campaign. The erosion in Brazil began slightly before Bolsonaro came to power, and this was due to many corruption scandals by the Workers' Party, who had been in power in Brazil since 2002. Under Bolsonaro's rule, the country fell to the lowest levels of democracy in the country in this century, and have since bounced back once Bolsonaro lost to former President Lula. So, in order to explain why Chavez was that much more successful while Bolsonaro was less so, there are several factors of comparison between the two. First comes from the basis of their political beliefs. Chavez came from the left and had strong populist beliefs on uplifting the Venezuelan people and socialism. Chavez was also a very prominent figure in Venezuela from his time as one of the leaders of the Bolivarian Revolution before his election, and this contributed to his mass popularity among Venezuelan people. Chavez was extremely charismatic and had a weekly TV show where he was able to share his political messages with Venezuelan citizens. Immediately following his first election, Chavez worked to pass a new constitution in which the 2 2000s of Congress were changed to only one house, term limits were doubled from 3 to 6 years, and presidential powers were expanded. The Constitution easily passed by popular referendum, and Chavez was elected by 60% of the vote. Chavez continued his popularity and control over Venezuela despite an attempted coup and a failed recall referendum, and in 2009, Chavez officially removed all term limits. The other part of the Venezuelan picture is the oil-dependent economy. So throughout his time, Chavez worked to nationalize the oil market, making Venezuela's largest export state-owned. At the same time, he canceled the license of publicly owned television, established a national central bank, and nationalized electricity, further expanding the power of the central government over the economy. Opposition forces began to push back against Chavez starting in 2010, but in order to continue his place of power, he redrew congressional districts, continuing the control of Congress by his party. In 2012, Venezuela officially fell into authoritarianism. After Chavez was re-elected for the final time in an illegitimate election, he passed shortly after due to cancer. His successor, Nicolas Maduro, was able to continue Chavez's methods of erosion, and today the country is still in an economic and social crisis. So Jair Bolsonaro was different from Chavez in many ways, despite the fact that both of them shared some populist tendencies. Bolsonaro is a right populist, and his ideas are founded in anti-corruption. The election of Bolsonaro came after almost 20 years of the Workers' Party, or what they call the PT, control over Brazilian presidency, and however the last couple of years of the PT rule were tainted by corruption scandals that led to the accusal and impeachment of several prominent PT figures, including President Lula. This is important to the story because Bolsonaro was a member of Congress throughout these many corruption trials and gained popularity from running on an anti-PT platform. Bolsonaro was a former military officer and is known for his very masculine traditional values. He capitalized on an existing gender gap in Brazilian society to win his election, and throughout his time as president, he's known for his anti-women, anti-LGBTQ+, and anti-minority comments, as well as his denial of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. While Bolsonaro had many of the populist tendencies and the support while he was in office, he ran into several challenges in achieving the same levels of erosion that Chavez did. Brazil has a strong multi-party system, which makes it difficult for any one party to control Congress. Because of this, Bolsonaro was unable to pass the same measures that Chavez did to stop term limits, rewrite the Constitution, or dissolve the two houses of Congress in his favor. When Bolsonaro was out for re-election against former and very popular President Lula, the divided Brazilian population and discontent with many of his regressive views led to his electoral loss by a vote of 51% to 49%, the closest election in Brazilian history. However, Bolsonaro made one last attempt at holding his position in power and incited an insurrection on the Brazilian capital following his loss. His attempt was unsuccessful and he fled to Florida while his involvement was investigated. President Lula then returned to office and has been able to kind of reverse the amount of erosion that Bolsonaro accomplished during his term. So, despite the differences between the two leaders, both of them were considered populist because of their beliefs. So, why was Chavez that much more successful than Bolsonaro in achieving these levels of erosion? There are several hypotheses for why this occurred, including differences in leadership styles, the success or lack of success of collective action against a political leader, low approval democracy in civil society, the importance of a majority coalition in Congress, composition of economic resources and inequality, and the strength of democracy in the surrounding countries. While these are just hypotheses, my current conclusions based on the research that I've done so far is that Chavez's success was not simply one of these factors, but the ability for him to capitalize on social, economic, and political factors that allowed him to erode democracy. So economically, the existence of a petrostate and the ability for Chavez to exercise state control over the country's main export allowed him to control the country in a way that Bolsonaro was unable to. Politically, Chavez was able to immediately dissolve one of the congressional houses, giving his party the majority in Congress, which ensured that Chavez would stay in power and be able to carry out his methods of erosion. Bolsonaro was unable to form a majority coalition in Congress due to the Brazilian multi-party system, which blocked his advances in power, advances to stay in power, extend term limits, or rewrite the Constitution. And finally, socially, Chavez was able to maintain popularity throughout his entire term and leverage his power to ensure that he would get re-elected by reducing the strength of opposition parties through his political actions, and any civil push to remove him from power swiftly failed. Bolsonaro was unable to achieve the same level of popularity due to his very conservative values and the fact that his opponent in 2022 very popular from his previous time in office. So I'm still working to research all of the hypotheses that were on the slide previously, but this is the research that I've done so far, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. But thank you.
I'm going to invite Dr. Nunez up to present you with the cord and stole that you'll wear at graduation to recognize this amazing presentation and everything you've done in honors. Yeah. Exactly. Questions for Ryan?
Why do you think readers do this? Like, did you just read, or why?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is that they do believe in the idea that democracy has failures and needs to be corrected, so that's the basis of a lot of it, and they see these corrections of like changing accountability as the way of fixing democracy, so that's the intention. It just tends to have negative consequences on democracy because of that.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between a populist leader and someone like Hitler who did some of the similar things that you mentioned?
I'll try my best, but I think with a populist leader, you ideologically think that there are failures within a democracy, and kind of there's
I'm
just
the mom.
yeah. We talked about this once.
I'll do you one.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I'm teaching an honors class. I don't know if any of my students are right now on fascism this semester, and we're ending the semester talking about populism and how it's different from fascism. And Ryan, if you would come teach the class on Wednesday, talk about your research, then you'll have more time to collect your thoughts to your mom's question, and you'll have a whole hour to talk about it.
That sounds great.
And your mom's invited. No, please. I want to hear her talk about it more too.
I know you recently had to pivot
Yes.
in your research. Can you talk a little bit about the decision made and kind of where you were and how you got to where you are?
Yes. So as of like last week, Monday, I changed the topic a little bit. So originally I had 3 cases, so it's going to be Brazil, Venezuela, and Chile. But just to make the comparison a little bit more effective and focus just on populism and its effects on democracy, that was kind of the pivoting point. So I think where we're at right now is a lot more focused and hopefully will lead to better results.
Your advisor has a question.
Populism in the U.S., is that right?
Yes. Wait, sorry.
Populism in the U.S., is it a threat to American democracy?
I think yes. I mean, they call Bolsonaro like the Trump of the tropics is what they call him. So a lot of what we just talked about with Bolsonaro and Trump tried to do very similarly in the U.S. So I have lots of concerns on if he gets reelected. But
Or if you can go back a couple of slides, I think. Okay, there you go. Oh,
which one? This one?
there you go. Right. One of the things that Bolsonaro couldn't do in Brazil was form a big coalition in Congress, right? Because of the multi-party system. Here, and right, that kind of thing. So inequality, right? The kind of thing that makes people support that kind of leadership. Unfortunately, this country is more unequal than it used to be, right? So I just want to point out that what Ryan's doing here is really, a very good example of effective sort of comparative analysis, right? Where you compare cases that have similarities and differences to try to identify the causes, the things that matter. And this is not something that, we don't need to restrict this to Brazil and Venezuela, right? But it's like, okay, we learn about this. to the extent that there is a populist leader, and you know, populism comes from the left and the right, right? You know, under conditions there that could facilitate erosion, right?